It is a great pleasure to be here. I've really looked forward to this, and I'm excited to be here, and thank you for taking time out of your busy Saturday in order to be here. All this material is available on a book from Apologetics Press. And we have a lot of territory to cover, so let's move very quickly forward. And what I want to do is systematically walk us through this so that we make sense of this whole concept of government. You know, where did this come from? Is this a human invention? Well, no, as a matter of fact, God ordained human government, civil government. You know, we go back and look at what our founders said. They said that, you know, when humans are just in existence on the planet, they are in a state of, and they use this word, nature. But what they meant by that was you're here on God's earth and you are just, you know, part of the life on the planet. And it, you know, very quickly reached a point where they realized, hey, we're going to have to kind of band together because there's evil people. And so let's come together, form a group, and then organize ourselves so that we can be protected. And so that's where, you know, police and sheriffs and all that came from. So all of that was the rationale for why human government ought to exist. Well, you go to the Bible and come to find out, God made it very clear that this is all part of His will. He intended for this to be the case. And you're familiar, no doubt, with the passages, Romans 13 being a big one, which explicitly states that this civil authority comes from God. And even if civil authority misconducts itself, the principle, the ideal of civil government is a God-ordained concept. So it comes from God. It's appointed by God. Peter worded it this way: submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors, as to those who are, notice, sent by Him. Now, we shake our head a lot of times at some of the civil authorities to which we have submitted ourselves. Well, God did not approve of any of that. But the concept of having civil authorities is right. But humans are going to be good or evil no matter what the situation they might be in. And sometimes I think we confuse the two. Whenever Jesus was confronted, you remember about the paying taxes. He said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. You know, there's one of the proofs, not only of the deity of Christ, but of the inspiration of the Bible, the way He reacted to His adversaries and questioners, gave responses that are just astounding. How logical and how piercing they were, and that's certainly one of those occasions. Samuel Langdon was one of the founders of our country, very heavily involved in the formation of our country and his influence. Most of these people that I'll refer to, you probably never even heard of. You know, you've heard of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, John, a few others. And the liberal element in our country has taken one or two of those and really misrepresented them, but brushstroke the whole founding era. Do you know there were no fewer than, I would say, you know, to be very broad, 250 minimum to maybe 400 founding fathers and mothers that impacted our country. And I without any fear of successful contradiction, I would say that 98% of those professed Christianity in the broad sense. Well, I thought they were all pretty much atheists and deists, and that's a lie. An outright feature of propaganda. You know, we're getting a lot of that in our country now, right? When Christian values were held up and everyone knew you shouldn't lie. Remember the old story? I don't know that it's actually true, but it definitely represented the founders. George Washington chopped down the cherry tree, and when confronted, I can't tell a lie. See, that was embedded into American consciousness, not anymore. Not only do politicians lie, they're brazen about it. They'll stand there and look you right in the face and say something that you know is not true, and it doesn't faze them one bit. Well, we're in a situation that's dire because the founder said, and the Bible teaches, once your values evaporate in your culture's going down. Your country's going down. Look at this sermon that he preached which, by the way, was very common. This too is odd. The politicians, for much of our early history, would invite preachers to come in and preach at their political assemblies, especially elections. And they would come in, all those legislators would sit there and listen to a sermon. I think here in Texas you still have a prayer before they begin a session, and some indication, but they're not going to sit there and listen to a preacher. Of course, sadly, if they brought in many of the preachers in Christendom today, it'd be a lot of theatrics and fluff. It wouldn't be any Bible. Well, I'm telling you, these fellas, denominationalism then is not the denominationalism of today. You need to understand that. Like instrumental music, what denomination doesn't have it? None of the denominations had it in 1776. And it wasn't because they just couldn't afford it or something. They were founded by reformers back in the 1600s who adamantly opposed it. Why? Because it's not authorized in the Bible. They called it papish, associated with high church Catholicism type stuff, and it's reverting to Judaism. I'm telling you, that's what they said. Well, that's just one of the changes that's come over Christendom, moving further and further away from the Bible. These fellows were a lot closer. Look what he said. The Jewish government, according to the original Constitution, which was divinely established, look at their S's back then. It looks kind of like one of our little F's. Notice, divinely established, God set up the Old Testament, is considered merely, if considered in a merely civil view, was a perfect republic. You don't hear any of our our politicians today saying that we have a republic. They say we have a democracy. The founders did not say that. In fact, they openly and verbally said, we are not a democracy, and if we ever become one, we're bringing about our demise. And he then describes how really that's how God set Israel up in the formation of a republic. Look at the parallels here that I tried to put together and think through this. You had, God of course was the king, but he appointed an executive. We have a president. They had basically a panel of judges, which fits our judicial situation, and then you had the nation divided up into these different groups. And I'm telling you, this concept here was not lost on the founders. They repeated it frequently. They said, how Egypt came out of the bondage of, the Israelites came out of the bondage of Egypt and went to the Canaan's land by whose permission and orchestration? By God. And I'm telling you, the founders over and over, even Jefferson, who was one of the least religious of the founders, made the connection. We came out of England, they came out of Egypt, we came to a land that was beneficent, and the same God, listen to this, the same God that brought them out of Egypt brought our people out of England. Oh yeah, he was an atheist. And it's even argued that this division of government, judicial, legislative, and executive, came right from the Bible, patterned on the concept of God. Think about that. The extent to which this country was founded in an environment of pro-Christianity, pro-Bible is absolutely astounding. And while they did not mistreat or dislike Muslims and Native Americans, Indians. Native Americans are really a misnomer of a term. What does that mean? Well, they were the first ones here. No, they weren't. Where'd you get that? Do you know they've done genetic tests and found out that all Indians from Alaska all the way down to the tip of South America, genetically, you can trace all this now. They came from Asia, migrated over here. Well, everybody came from Noah when they stepped off the ark. So the concept, well, we don't have time to go into this, but at the very back of this book, God and Government, I do a lengthy section on whether or not the people that founded our country mistreated the Native Americans in so doing. You need to go read that. We have been lied to about all of that too. So, our country is literally patterned after the way God set up a country. You know, the law of Moses is the only civil law code. Notice that. That law code was designed to govern Israel as a physical nation, a theocracy, one nation under God. Well, that's the only civil law code on the planet in human history that emanated from the mind of God. Do you know the founders understood that? And that's why they had so much to say about it, like the Ten Commandments. They understood that that's not Christianity, that's Judaism. They called it the Hebrew law code. But they understood, with the exception of the Sabbath, which in their mind they transposed to Sunday, but they understood that, hey, these are foundational moral principles on which any country that wants to be successful must be based, because that's how God set it up. Absolutely astounding. Question: why did God set up civil government? I'm convinced if you polled all 350 million Americans, just tell them, write down on a piece of paper real quick, what's the point of civil government? What's the purpose? I don't believe they could tell you. Oh, they would tell you what they think, but they'd be wrong. Our own politicians and legislators don't get it. They've turned American government into a money changer type situation that Jesus faced in the first century. But the Bible states plainly the purpose of government is to provide protection for the population. That's it. That's why you come together and form a group of people who are banded together, so that you can pool your resources in order to have a lifestyle where you're not being plundered, where you can live life the way God intended for you to live life by pursuing Christianity and living life in such a way that you'll anticipate eternity. Let me give you passages. They're all over the place. What's the purpose of rulers? Well, they're a terror. They're not a terror to good works, but to evil. God's diakonos, deacon, minister, servant, to you for good. If you do evil, you ought to be afraid. He doesn't bear the sword in vain because he's God's minister. And there it is, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Do you think any of our legislators on the national or even state level understand that? Why are you running for office? Why do you want to be in politics and government? Well, because I want to secure the safety of our people. Have you ever heard any of them say that? Even if there are sub-purposes of government, that's the central thrust, according to the Bible. That's why God wanted it set up. 1 Peter, submit yourselves. Why? Because they're sent by whom? For the punishment of evildoers, and, look at this, the praise of those who do good. It's just the opposite now in our country. They mollycoddle and praise the evildoers. And if you don't like that, you're racist. And then they don't like the religious people. They've declared war really on us Christians. We're really at war. And that's all this war's about. It's not about anything else. It's about whether our country is going to completely reject the God of the Bible and the one true religion of the Bible. We must keep that clear in our minds. Look at Paul's statement to Timothy. Supplications, prayers, intercessions, giving of thanks be made for all men, for all kings, kings who are in authority. There's your government. Why? What's the point of this government? Why are we to pray for them? So that we can live life in peace and practice Christianity. I'm telling you, that's what the founders said. The purpose of life is to prepare for eternity by pursuing the one true God, and they use this expression over and over, true religion. They understood there was false religion, which is everything but Christianity. And then there's true religion. And that's the purpose of government, to enable you to pursue that unhampered, unimpeded, with no one interfering. Notice, this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. So really, in the mind of God, civil government was ordained in order for Christianity to have an opportunity to flourish and to evangelize the world. I'm confident not one politician on our planet knows that. They've bought into this notion of freedom of religion in a warped sense. The freedom of religion that the founders advocated was freedom to practice Christianity. Now, you and I may not understand the Bible the same, But under under this government, under this country, okay, you believe this, the Bible teaches, I believe this, the Bible, but you are both going to be allowed to pursue those different interpretations as long as, listen to what they said about this, as long as you don't practice immorality. So if you try to argue that the Bible teaches that you can have multiple wives, not going to fly here. No freedom of religion for you on that. They said that. Do you remember in the late 1800s when the Mormons moved out to Utah and began promoting plural marriage? There were a number of cases all the way to the Supreme Court. And you know what all those judges said? You can't fly that under the freedom of religion. That's what they argued. They said, this is our religion. How dare you interfere with it? From the very beginning of this country, we've had freedom of religion. They came back and said, not for polygamy. Why? Because that violates Christianity. So you can't justify that. Number two, they said you can have freedom of religion, even if you're Hindu, Muslim, whatever, as long as your religion doesn't advocate that you harm other people. Oh, you believe you ought to kill all the Christians? No freedom of religion for you in this country. I'm telling you, the founders said that because they gauged everything by the moral principles of the Bible. Freedom of religion to that extent. So, look again at these passages. What's the purpose of government? To serve as a terror to evil works, an avenger to execute wrath on him who does evil, for the punishment of evildoers, for the praise of those who do good, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life. Now, we ought to be able to get that clearly in our minds. And then when we vote for people, we ought to send them letters and say, by the way, do you know what you're supposed to be doing if you're elected? Look at how they say. Now, I've showed you what the Bible says. Now, let me prove to you that this is what they said over and over and over. Take, for example, John Jay. Wow, what a fellow. First U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice appointed by George Washington. He was from the state of New York. Look at this, Vice President of the American Bible Society. I found an original constitution of the American Bible Society. Go online and look at it. And it showed the initial officers, big long list. I think every one of them, maybe with the exception of one or two, were founding fathers. In fact, he was the first vice president. So here are these guys, they're setting up a country. They've got all kinds of things to do. They're busy, and they have time to be a part of an organization whose sole purpose, it's in the Constitution, was to distribute the Bible far and wide. Without doctrinal comment. Nobody's trying to push their view. We just want to get the Bible out there. You know, the Continental Congress did that during the Revolutionary War twice. First, they had a Bible printed. This is Congress now. They thought this was part of their job. They wanted more Bibles distributed among the colonies in anticipation of freedom. They did it the first time, and then the British embargo of the Atlantic coast prevented them, the first time they imported 30,000 from Europe, and then when the embargo prevented that kind of importation, they commissioned it to be translated and printed within the United States, twice. Okay, so we go to Washington, D.C., line up all the congressmen and congresswomen and say, do you perceive it as part of your role to disseminate the Bible throughout the American population? What would every single one of them say? Well, then they're not like the founding fathers of our country, the people that set up our country. And that's not just a minor point. Look at this letter. You can see it with your own eyes. A letter that he sent to John Murray in 1818. Wickedness rendered human government necessary to restrain the violence and injustice. That's why you start a government. It's the reason. Because see, if you're on your ranch over here and I'm on my ranch over here and you're over there, we're just vulnerable to whatever thieves or whoever come and try to attack us separate. So we band together in order to stop that. Now notice the implication of that for defensive warfare and so forth. To facilitate the establishment and administration of government, the human race became, look at this, in the course of providence. God set it up this way, divided into separate and distinct nations. Remember, Paul made this point on Mars Hill to the Athenian philosophers in Acts 17. Every nation instituted a government with authority and power to protect it against domestic and foreign aggressions. There's the purpose. foreign aggressions, yeah, we need a government for that, a military. It needs to be strong. There's an element in our country politically, how do they feel about the military? In fact, how do they feel about police on our streets? They are undercutting our entire civilization as God and the founders intended it. And then what about internal aggressions? That's the evil people, the criminals. That's the purpose of government. Domestic and foreign aggressions. For each government provided for the internal peace and security of the nation by laws for punishing their offending subjects. So there is the purpose. The law of all the nations prescribed the conduct which they were to observe towards each other and allowed war to be waged, look at this, by an innocent against an offending nation, when rendered just and necessary by unprovoked, atrocious, and unredressed injuries. Do you know the Founding Fathers said the war we waged against England was defensive? They came after us. And on that basis, they said, we are authorized by God to respond accordingly. Alexander Hamilton, again, one of the signers of the Constitution, very, very integrally involved. His face is on our $10 bill, which isn't worth much, but he's still there. Why was government instituted at all? Because the passions of men, this is in the Federalist Papers, the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. That's the purpose of government, to constrain those who oppose what is right. Unbelievable. James Madison, also a signer, 4th president. It is sufficiently obvious that persons and property are the two great subjects on which governments are to act. See, protect your person and your property. The rights of persons, the rights of property are the objects for the protection of which government was instituted. That's its purpose. But wait a minute, we got to collect a bunch of money and give it to people that we think deserve it. That's not the purpose of government. Where do you get off doing that? Besides robbing and pillaging the rest of the members of society. I'm telling you, that was their attitude. Look at this. You can go back and see all this stuff at loc.gov, Library of Congress. The Journals of the Provincial Congress of Massachusetts, October 1774. Your Excellency, this is an address to the governor. Your Excellency must be sensible that the sole end of government, the sole purpose of government, is the protection and security of the people. Do you feel like the government is, not that you're expecting them to come and protect you, but do you feel like they're doing their job? Second president, first vice president, signer of the Constitution, on and on and on. Co-wrote the Massachusetts Constitution. In his discourses on Davila. You ought to go back and look at this stuff. It's rich. It's loaded with Bible principles. Property must be secured or you will not have freedom. Americans have so much freedom. We've had a lot of it taken away, but we still have so much compared to the rest of the world that we can't even conceptualize what it would be like to not have it. But we're headed that way. We're going to find out. But you know what the founder said over and over and over? You got to have Christian morality, Christian principles, keep the government straight, then you have all the freedom you want. And the more people have Christianity, the less jails you're going to have, the less prison. We're building those as fast as we can. And the more freedom the people will have to live their own lives before God and pursue their own happiness, which they defined as bringing your life into harmony with God's will. You can't be happy any other way. All right, now how does God intend for government to carry out this purpose of protecting the citizens? Oh boy, we've gone far astray on that one too. Number one, capital punishment. You know, since the 60s, I well remember, the liberal element began to assert itself after World War II. And this was one of the big topics. Oh, capital punishment, that's not even Christian. I've heard Christians say that. That's not even Christian. What, they don't even read their Bibles. They're not even acquainted with the God of the Bible. I use this one first, or go to this one first, because it's clearly the main one that God Himself formulated. Unbelievable. Liberal element in our country has distorted and erased so much of the founding of our country and biblical thinking. I would argue it was the primary means of preserving law and order by God. Why do I say that? How do I know that? Well, first of all, show me one passage in the Bible that where God says incarceration, which is the number one form of punishment, right, in our country? Just put people in a cell and, well, they don't have to stay there. They get to exercise and lift weights so that if they ever get out, they're really muscular and can be more efficient in their crimes. You will not find under the law of Moses, listen to this, where God stipulated incarceration. That's a man-made concept. There is one instance under the law of Moses where if a person is considered perhaps guilty of a crime, they are placed in a temporary holding cell until guilt could be determined. That's it. There's no, okay, you're guilty, you've been charged, and we've proven it's true, now we're going to put you over here in this little building and leave you there. That is not according to the will of God. Now, is that radical or what? If people say, okay, we're going back to the Bible today, then we'd have to shut down all these prisons. Well, what are you going to do with the inhabitants? Because there's a big element that says, yeah, let's do that, turn them free. No. You go back and implement the penalties that God Himself stipulated for each one of those individuals. That's what you do. Well, let's look at some of these. First of all, I remember the argument being given back in the 60s. Oh, capital punishment does not deter criminals. It doesn't discourage more crime. Well, that's what you say. But God says otherwise. And He says it over and over and over. Here are some examples. Stone him with stones until he dies because he sought to entice you away from the Lord. Deuteronomy 13 is a powerful passage. Who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. And what will be the result of that after you execute this fellow? Well, the whole country's going to hear about it, and it will instill fear in them. Now, there's the mind of God telling us spiritual reality, no matter what the world around us says. And this is over and over and over. Deuteronomy 21, you have a stubborn, rebellious son, probably, 21 well over. He won't obey the voice of his father, mother. They've chastened him. He won't listen to him. His father and his mother take him and bring him to the elders of the city. They say to him, hey, this is our son. He's stubborn, rebellious. He's a drunkard, a glutton. All right, gather all the men of the city, stone him to death with stones, put away evil from your midst, and in the meantime, encourage Israel to be fearful. Fundamental biblical principles. Now, when you read things like that and we think, well, I just don't agree with that. Okay, I got you. But this is God's thinking on the matter. This is God's thinking. So you can run all your studies and run all your liberal concepts through all this psychological analysis and all this stuff. Get Freud to jump in there too. He was an atheist. When you're all done, you better go back to the thinking of God, because He's right. Here's just a few statistics. Some of these are old. The rates for unlawful killings in Britain have more than doubled since the abolition of capital punishment. Statistics kept for 5 years, 65 to 69, showed a 125% increase in murders when they suspended the death penalty. In the U.S., in the 90s, it dropped by 26% during increased use of the death penalty. Do you remember that fellow that got caned in Singapore? It's an American, wasn't it? He went over there and I think he dropped gum on the sidewalk or something. And they caned that fellow. And I remember all of the news media, all of our country, oh, that's horrible. They're supposed to be caning their own children, but they're not doing it. And then you go to a foreign country where they say, if you do this, we're going to cane you. And we just, horror. See, we'd already moved far away from the thinking of God. There is such a thing as child abuse. But spanking a child is not in that category. Amen. That's why Solomon said, you need to whip your child with a rod and don't think that you're going to kill him. Could a child be killed with a rod? Yes. But that doesn't necessarily follow. You know, that generation that believed in that, they're about all gone. And our younger people have bought into all of the propaganda that says, oh, don't ever spank. I remember when Johnny Ramsey said up there in Sherman, Texas, he had to go out there every time and pick the limb off the tree. And he got a lot of them. In fact, he said it was a peach tree and we never got a peach crop on that tree. That was standard American civilization from the founding right up to the liberal 60s. Everybody understood that. And the Bible refers to it over and over and over as being according to the will of God. And if you don't properly discipline a child, you're setting him up for hell. Amen. And you will be largely culpable. Deeply embedded in the consciousness of these Asians is the notion of capital punishment. The population knows precisely what will happen to them if they're convicted of murder or drug trafficking. Consequently, crime is a lot less in those countries. America had 5 times as many murders per head of population as did Britain in 97, while Singapore had 15 times fewer murders per head of population than Britain. Singapore, they have look at this, on the spot, like Solomon said, speedily. For even what we would call trivial, littering, chewing gum in the street, caning for males between 18 and 50 for a variety of offenses, more rigorous imprisonment for serious crimes. In Texas, where capital punishment is more frequent, I'm really concerned about Texas with these Californians pouring in here. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping, I know you are too, I'm hoping they're the Californians that are sick of the insanity of that state, right? Maybe they're the good people that are flooding into Texas and several other places too. I hope. But what does the Lord have in mind for our country? He'll only put up with so much rejection of His will. And then you're going down. All of us. Remember how Abraham asked that heart-provoking question. Will you destroy the righteous along with the wicked? Well, we know the Bible teaches that even if we are caught up in all of it and we go down, we die, we know where we're going, so that's not ultimately a big deal, but will God punish our country and somehow allow it to continue to survive and Christians to survive? I don't know. We don't know what God has in mind, but we need to face up to the fact that we deserve it. Our country's already done more now to deserve to go down. When you kill over 60 million babies, what else is there to say? Hitler only killed, 7 million adults? And we've killed innocent babies, shed innocent blood. One of the things God hates, Proverbs 6. We deserve it. We deserve to go down. Unless the sentence against an evil work is executed speedily, then wickedness flourishes. It spreads. It promotes itself within a civilization and a society. Here's the wisdom of God on display. You can trace the death penalty at least back to just right at the end of the flood. It's there. How much clearer can you get than that? So, if someone kills another person, then human beings, constituted as duly governmental authority, are to shed his blood. Now, there's God's view of the matter. And somebody says, well, how's he any different than the murderer? Well, that's your faulty human reasoning. God wants proper punishment executed, and somebody has to do it, and that has to be civil authority. And look at the reason. Man is made in the image of God. Here is our Constitution. No person shall be held answerable for a capital crime unless he's worthy of punishment for a capital crime. We need to be careful and make certain that they're guilty and have actually committed crimes. Remember that expression? Crimes worthy of death. But if he has, then it needs to be done, implemented. You can be deprived of your life and your liberty, but it has to be with due process of law. That's written into our Constitution. Now, who authored the law? Moses. Not Moses, right? Okay. Then every one of those laws you know are pure, pristine, and perfect. In fact, the psalmist said that God's law is perfect. I have found, let's see, if the central purpose of civil government is to protect the innocent by restraining and punishing the wicked, what was the central means of doing so? Well, to prove to you that it was capital punishment, so far, depending upon how you count these, there was no fewer than 18 capital crimes. Crimes for which the death penalty was to be invoked. Now, just sit there. If you haven't thought about this, sit there and let this sink in. This is God's thinking on the matter. Kidnapping. How many children are kidnapped in this country and carried off and unspeakable things done to them? They're ruined. You imagine a little 4-year-old child, you're in a crowd and suddenly you can't find the child. You thought you were close and had him, and they're gone. And they're taken off by some, crazy person that is depraved, sexually abused, and on and on. And this kind of thing's been going on in our country at a high rate. Now here's God's thinking on the matter. That kidnapper, he's to be executed. There was a case down in Louisiana that went all the way to the state Supreme Court. This fellow took his, it's been long enough, I think it was his niece. She was like 8 or 10 years old. And when he got through with her, the paramedics were called. She nearly bled to death. He just damaged her beyond comprehension. And the first court, said that's death penalty. And the liberal element, pushed it all the way up to the state Supreme Court. Death penalty. This fellow deserves to die. Then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Oh no! Kennedy wrote the opinion of the court. Oh, we risk our own descent into brutality if we kill this fellow. I'm telling you that Supreme Court justice does not know the God of the Bible. He's not acquainted with him. And so the fellow's sentence was commuted. This has been going on in our country all over the place. Crimes worthy of death. And we got this fake, self-righteous attitude that, oh no, we're bigger than that. No, you don't understand the God of the Bible, and you're destroying our civilization. You're encouraging wickedness to flourish. Here's that listing of 18. How much rape has gone on in our country? See, all these things upsurged after World War II. Prior to that, the statistics show that crime, divorce, a lot of things in our country, they occurred, but they were low. And then after World War II, baby boomer generation began to kick into gear, and things have just been downhill ever since. The statistics are horrible. Well, here's God's attitude about the matter. You rape a married woman, we're going to put you to death. That's what ought to be done. How is sacrificing children to a false god any different than killing an unborn baby? God commented on that. When the Israelites started copying, the Moabites and others that were offering their child, God said, not only is this an abomination, it never entered my mind to have you do something like that. And we are butchering them as fast as we can conceive them. And the conception is due to the widespread immorality in our society. Women brag about it. These Hollywood women that go from movie star to movie star, run and have an abortion. They brag about it. See, sin is bad enough, but when you brag about it, the God of the Bible, you're looking at that. He's long-suffering. That's stated over and over and over. Why did he wait 120 years before he destroyed the the world, the pre-flood world. Why did he do that? Would you and I wait that long? But he did. It's part of an infinite being, the nature of an infinite, perfect God. But there comes an end to that. He flooded this planet with a deluge. There had to have been millions, if not billions of people on the planet. You know, the statistics that have been run on that, taking into account extended patriarchal ages and the amount of time and so forth, there could have been 5, 10, 15, more people on the planet than there are now. And God wiped them all out, except for, 1 Peter 3:20, 8 people. A perfect, all-loving, benevolent God. No contradiction there. The heinousness of sin is what we don't grasp. Look at Leviticus 27, or Numbers 35. All these things shall be a statute of judgment to you through your generations and all your dwellings. Whoever kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the testimony of witnesses. Look at that. Due process, yes. 2 or more, yes. Not one won't do it. One witness is not enough to have somebody put to death, even if he's guilty. See, that's the mind of God too. But look at this. You can't take any ransom for the life of a murderer. I wonder how many Christian lawyers are involved in this. Here's a guy that has committed murder. But I'm going to work hard as an attorney to get him life imprisonment, no death. Okay. You're going against the will of God. You have no right to do that. We need to overhaul our entire legal system, which has been so distorted. I've looked at these fathers of American jurisprudence back in the founding era. They were spot on all this stuff. And then I've asked young people that go to law school, have you ever heard of James Kent? One of our founding fathers of American jurisprudence? No? So you go to law school in this country and you don't even know who the men were that set up the legal system of this civilization? Why? Because we don't believe that stuff anymore. Well, how's that working out for you? Look at this. No atonement can be made for the land for the blood that's shed on it except by the blood of him. See, now we're getting a little bit deeper into the mind of God. So you're telling me that when innocent blood is shed in our country, that somehow affects the land in such a way that atonement must be made or trouble will lie ahead? That's right. Well, how can we make atonement? You've got to execute the people that are killing. Well, but we're Christians. We live under Christianity, and that's Old Testament. In fact, hear people talk about it, that was a different God. God is infinite. He doesn't change. He's immutable. But Romans 13 says the government's to bear the sword. I'm sure that's not for the purpose of maybe tickling them under the ribs or something like that, or spanking them with it maybe. That's an implement of execution. God wants duly constituted civil authority to invoke the death penalty on those who commit crimes worthy of death. Do you remember when Paul was before Roman Procurator Porcius Festus? And he said, you know, if I've done anything that's worthy of death, you kill me. That would be God's will on the matter. And I have no problem with it. What a different attitude than what we have today. So according to the Bible, the founders of America, the purpose of government is to provide protection for citizens and their God-given rights and acquired property can be secure. And the primary way to do that, not the only way, but the primary way is capital punishment. How in the world can we maintain our stability and safety if we've demoted the death penalty to an irrelevant status? I think this would be a good place to stop and take our break, and then we'll pick up there. Thank you for your attention.